Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on managing supply chains during COVID-19. So clearly, COVID-19 has had a large impact on global supply chains across the world, particularly in Cambodia. And I suppose demonstrating that, we actually had over 100 registered participants for today. And so I wanted to thank you all for your active interest and participation in this event. Before moving on, I just wanted to thank our 2020 sponsors for making today's event possible. Today actually marks the 12th of our Eurochan webinar series, where we discuss business opportunities in Cambodia, as well as topics relevant to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Our previous webinars can be found on the Eurochan YouTube channel, which you can find by simply typing Eurochan into Google. So to introduce myself, I'll just camera on for. My name is Tom Hesketh. I'm the Business Services Manager at Eurochan Cambodia. So hello to all participants. And today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Thomas Fernandez, our speaker. So Thomas started his career in freight forwarding and logistics in 1984 in Germany, and then has since moved on to setting up logistics companies in Cambodia and Thailand. And I'm sure he'll introduce himself in a bit more detail a bit later. You may know him from being the trainer of our popular public training courses on supply chain management, which we hope to start again in late 2020. So to introduce today's agenda, this webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. It will follow a more seminar-type style, which will play onto Thomas's strengths, who's also a logistics professor or lecturer at the University of the Thai Chamber of Commerce in Bangkok. It will be about around 45 minutes of Thomas's content before moving into a 15-minute Q&A. You will see in your bottom right-hand corner a chat window, and it's here that you can type your questions in at any time throughout the webinar. So Thomas will try to address these questions during his talk, but if he can't get to it during the talk, he'll address them in the Q&A session at the end. So I would encourage you all to type your questions in throughout the webinar in that bottom right-hand box. And a final note is that today's presentation will be made available and in full on our YouTube channel. So if you do experience any audio or connection issues throughout the webinar, you'll be able to access a high-quality recording later on. And finally, if connection issues prevent us from completing the live webinar, we'll close the live session and we'll record the webinar and send it to all participants. So, introduce today's webinar. Just before moving on, a quick note on Eurochan's own activities during COVID-19. We've been translating and summarizing all important announcements by the Royal Government to keep our mailing list subscribers informed. You may have seen these dropping into your inbox. If this is something you're interested in, please visit our website and our June newsletter. Just to give an idea of the scale and the speed in which the Royal Government is making these announcements, we posted around 37 of these summarized announcements between May and June alone. And finally, if you are interested in today's topic, I would encourage you to have a look on our YouTube channel, because in the past we did do one other webinar on business opportunities in logistics and infrastructure in Cambodia. And that would give the overview of the sector here today, which may complement some of the announcements that Thomas will make during his presentation. Okay, and so on that note then, I'll leave the floor to today's speaker, Dr. Thomas Fernandez. So Thomas, the floor is yours, and I'll put myself on mute.
Thank you very much, Tom, for the nice introduction. So welcome to Managing Supply Chains during COVID-19. We will talk today, my introduction, Tom already introduced me. I've been in Southeast Asia since 1990. I've been doing business in Cambodia since 1992 as a logistics provider. And I still have my own company, which is very active both in Bangkok and in Cambodia. So I'm very much personally involved in what is going on in Cambodia with the supply chains. This is the schedule of this presentation. First, there's a brief introduction to supply chain management. that is so that we are all on the same level. Yeah, different people have different definitions of supply chain, so we are covering that just in 5 minutes, and then supply chain risks and risk management. People who've taken my course with Eurocham in Phnom Penh will find this familiar, so I'm going through this quickly. And then we will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on supply chains in general, with some focus on Cambodia to see what problems do we have. And then we will come to the specific issues in Cambodia. This will be mainly the questions you have already sent in advance. Yeah, you can ask additional questions in the chat box. I try to address them during the presentation. And if not, then we have another 15 minutes of Q&A afterwards. So let's start with the introduction. Supply chain management manages the flow of three things. That is material, money, and information. Material usually flows from upstream to downstream, money from downstream to upstream, and information, which is a very important part, flows both ways. And important here, from the origin of the raw material to the end user. So if we have a factory, we not only look at our direct supplier and our direct customer, which may be a wholesaler or an importer in another country, but we look at the whole supply chain, which stretches from the origin of the raw material, not only the raw material that we receive from our components supplier, but the origin of the raw material. We will see why this view is important now in the COVID crisis also. And we look not only at our direct customer, but we want our products to reach the final consumer. If they don't reach the final consumer, then why do we produce them, right? So this is called upstream, the supply side, and this way is called downstream, the demand side of the supply chain. There is the supply chain operations reference model to show what is a good supply chain, what KPIs we can have. Reliability is the most important one, and this is perfect order fulfillment, and this is something that we have had problems with during this crisis. Yeah, looking at the comments. So this is perfect order fulfillment, means we receive orders for so many units and we supply so many units on time. Manufacturing today is a very complex part. We have many parts that go into our product. The product here, as an example, is a car. Now, if there are manufacturers here, now you know that your products have many components which you get from many suppliers, and these suppliers can be all over the world. Yeah, in this example we have many different brand names in many different countries. So the requirement for an efficient and effective supply chain is the efficient and effective flow of material, money, and information. Supply must match demand. So this is important. If we have too much supply, we have a lot of products that nobody wants to buy. We supply too much to the market. That's not good for us because we have costs. We bought the raw material, we invested the time. And if the supply is less than the demand, then we cannot supply to the market. We lose sales, we lose customers. That is also not good. That damages our name. So these are the problems that we are having with supply chains in general. But what are specific risks and how do we deal with supply chain risks? How do we manage supply chain risks? We have uncertainties and variabilities. Uncertainties are we don't know whether the supplier will deliver late or whether they will deliver less than we expected for whatever reasons. Now we have the risk that the demand is higher or lower than expected. We have to deal with that somehow. And we may have delivery problems such as unpassable roads, floods. We know this in Cambodia happens all the time. Strikes is a popular problem for Cambodian factories. Or, which we had this time, flights are canceled. There are no flights. There are fewer sailings by the ships. Then we have variability, which is seasonality. It means we can't predict. We know that in the tourist season, more sunscreen will be sold than in the rainy season. So how do we deal with this? We have supply uncertainties. We have demand uncertainties. Now, if the uncertainties are low, everything is much easier. If the uncertainties are high, we have to deal with this in different ways, and these ways are shown here. Yeah, so low supply uncertainty and low demand uncertainty means we want to use an efficient supply chain. We want to reduce costs because we can predict the demand. If we have low demand uncertainty, means we can predict the demand, but we have a high supply uncertainty. We don't know whether we can get the products, the raw materials on time. We use a risk hedging supply chain. For example, we use a lot of safety stock. If we have a high demand uncertainty, so we cannot really predict the demand, we don't know what's going to happen, and this is what we had here. But a low supply uncertainty, we still get all the supplies we need. Yeah, then we build a responsive supply chain. This may have been the case for some of you. It means we can respond to changes in demand very quickly. If at the same time the supply uncertainty is high and the demand uncertainty is high, we don't know whether we can get the raw materials, and we don't know how much the supply will be. We need agile supply chains. We have to use some more different techniques. And this is the most difficult one, and we have this for an extended time period now. So supply chain risk management is the implementation of strategies to manage both everyday and exceptional risks. Everyday risks are, for example, rainy season. Exceptional risks, this COVID-19 problem was an exceptional risk, not because the supply chains were interrupted, but especially because it was over a very long time period. Right? So we have to deal with that in our planning. Yes, so along the supply chain, based on continuous risk assessment, we must always look what risk is there. Companies that made an assessment at the beginning of the COVID crisis may have had more time to react to it and change their strategies, rather than companies that only found out later what was going to happen. We want to reduce vulnerability. We are vulnerable as a company. To be vulnerable means we can get hurt. Yeah, as a company, we don't want to get hurt. We cannot prevent these events from happening. We cannot prevent a COVID crisis. We cannot prevent an earthquake. Yeah, but we have to plan for it so that we don't get hurt so much. When we talk about risk management, we talk about internal risks, which are caused by something within the company. And we need to prepare for that. We have contingency plans. You've heard about contingency plans. Yeah, we have plans. For example, something happens which we don't want to happen. Machine breaks down. Yeah, what do we do then? Now, then we have external risks. Causes are outside of our company, and we need to evaluate these risks. How much do they do to our company? So the internal sources of risk are process risks, risk of interruption of processes within the company. I just mentioned a machine may break down. We have other risks, a strike, or we have other risks that people don't come to work for whatever reason. In this case, maybe they were sick, they were in quarantine, or they were in their villages, couldn't come back. I come back to that in the next part of this presentation. Control risks, risk of company rules and regulations not being observed. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. External risks, so we have supply risks, that we do not get the supplies of raw material. And this is the situation we had, or maybe still have, during this COVID crisis. Then there are demand risk, so that there's a disturbance in the flow of goods. We cannot deliver because there are no flights. We have demand shocks. Suddenly, nobody wants to buy our product anymore. And then we have environmental risks. These are risks due to external events, for example, port congestion, strike, natural disaster, and pandemic. That is an internal risk. Yeah. So we have the matrix of risks here: external risk, demand risk, environmental risk, supply risk. We are here. Internal risk, process risk, control risk, and we need to have mitigation and contingency plans. And the center is our vulnerability. Our supply chain risk can be categorized here in environmental risk, geopolitical risk, economic and technological risk. I will not go through all of these now. Yeah, I do that in my course, but we are interested here in the risk of pandemic. And when we look at the colors here, it means the risk is low. It is not very probable that this will happen. That doesn't mean it will never happen. So it happens now, right? So this is the risk that we are talking about. It says influenceable. We can influence how much it affects our company. How do we do that? So we are now coming to the crisis that we are facing at this moment and what we can do in order to reduce the effect it has on us, in order to reduce our vulnerability. Internal risks. So one of these examples would be many staff have to go into quarantine, or we had so many cases in our company that the company has to close them. Mitigation strategy is to scale down. That's easier said than done. But what I have seen, not particularly in Cambodia, but in several countries, is that demand and supply reduced. So the suppliers could not supply as much as we needed in order to keep our plan, but also the demand went down. So in total, we wanted to produce less, those companies wanted to produce less, and then they had fewer staff, so that was not the big issue on that level, not for the supply chain. Of course, for the staff, it's not good, but for the supply chain, it was not that issue. There was a question, I come back to that later. How did logistics companies deal with that? I will reply to that in the fourth part when we go to the real practical things. The factory cannot operate at 100% capacity because the staff cannot come to work due to stoppage of interprovincial public transport. So people went home when the factory had to close, and then the factory reopens, but the people cannot get back because there were no buses. Now, what we have seen is that people came back on trucks. People find a way to come to work because they wanted to work. The mitigation strategy of hiring local staff temporarily is easier said than done. Yeah. How many people are there, not only in that area where the factory is located, that are free to work right now? Maybe because their old job does not exist. Many workers actually came back from Thailand. They were migrant workers in Thailand. They lost their jobs there due to COVID-19. And then there are in Cambodia. Can we hire these people, at least on a temporary basis? How much training is required? There is a question, is there a difference between supply chain and value chain? Yes, it's a different concept. The supply chain is about the flow of goods and how to make it flow smoothly. The value chain is about adding value to the product. Yeah, there are some overlaps. Yeah, one part of the value chain is inbound logistics, which adds value to the product. But in the value chain, we are looking at adding value at every step, whereas the supply chain is about the flow of material and money and information, right? We know that there are internal and external risks, so how to deal with it. Yeah, I'm coming to that. I'm now in the theoretical part. Most of this presentation will be about the questions that you have. So the supplier cannot supply to us. Why? Because they are closed, or because they do not have enough staff, or they do not have enough raw material. And this is why I say we must look at the whole supply chain. If we understand why our supplier does not have enough raw material, then we can also think, okay, what is the reason for that? Is that likely to change in the near future? Or do we need to rethink our supply chain and maybe rethink our product mix? Then no transportation channel. Airports closed, ships overbooked. We have seen that we wanted to book a container for the next vessel and the shipping line says, oh, sorry, the next sailing has been canceled, and for the sailing after that, we are already overbooked. So you have to wait another week, yeah, which is, of course, not good. Airports being closed, meaning we cannot ship anything out by air. Most airports were closed for passengers, not for cargo. Yeah, so we can still move goods by air, but the capacity is a lot less. Most of the air cargo is actually moved on passenger planes. Yeah, so there we have a problem with moving the goods out, which we will also come back when we talk about the questions that came. Now, also our raw material, this is about suppliers. Our raw material cannot reach us. What can we do? Dual sourcing. Okay, so if our supplier cannot supply to us, we find another supplier. if we do that now, of course, it's very difficult. Everybody is looking for new suppliers because the total supply of these components, depending on which industry we are in, is less in the world than there was before because so many companies are closed. So what we have to do actually before any crisis hits, we have to have a second supplier at least in the list. Or what some big companies do, they never give all their demand, let's say if it's a car company for brakes, to this one supplier for brakes, but they give 20-30% to another supplier. So if the main supplier cannot supply, they can contact the second supplier. Another mitigation strategy which we can try to use now is local sourcing. We try to find the raw material from local suppliers. Maybe the raw materials are different, so we cannot produce the exact same products that we had before, and then we might have to change our product mix. Of course, this we cannot decide as supply chain managers. We have to talk with marketing and everybody, but that is an idea that we can bring in. We cannot find this component, but we have something else. Yeah, does the company want to use that? Demand risks. Okay, so in Cambodia, the main markets for the garment industry are the EU and the US. The EU was pretty hard hit. Everything was closed. People had curfews. They could not go out, stay at home. Yeah, do not go shopping. Department stores closed. So there was suddenly no demand and the customers did not place new orders. What also happened, and this was in the newspapers, customers, big customers, they had fixed orders which may have been produced already, and then they canceled. So big companies in Europe or the US, they canceled the orders even though they were produced already. So the garment factory in Cambodia had all the cost, had already paid for the raw material, the labor, everything, was about to ship the goods out, and then the customer says, we don't want the goods anymore. So what to do if this happens? The customers don't want to buy anymore. Do we want to change the product mix? Yeah, I have actually seen many garment factories and also tailor shops even that changed from producing garments to producing face masks. There was a huge demand for face masks. Yeah, there was an undersupply, and actually a lot of face masks were shipped instead of ready-made garments. This is an example of changing the product mix. Another example is to find new markets. So my customer does not want to buy these t-shirts anymore. Now what can I do? I have this raw material, I have the skills and the staff to produce garments. I find new markets. That's always easy to say, but maybe I don't try to find new markets in the low value segment, but instead I go into higher value segments. Now that way I can produce with higher profit margins. And here's a problem we had. We cannot ship out due to no international flights and blank sailings. It's not true that there were no international flights. There were still cargo flights, and some airlines now have started flights, airlines that are traditional passenger airlines or airlines that use passenger aircraft. They fly to Phnom Penh and load the airplanes full with air cargo, not only in the belly, in the lower deck, which is usually for cargo, but also in the cabin where the seats are. This is where they load cargo boxes, depending on how heavy the boxes are and so forth. But this is what they're doing now. The air freight for the airlines now is a very important source of income because they cannot sell tickets. So the air freight rates for per kilo are also very high now. So supply and demand, higher rate, and actually their airplanes are still full with as much cargo as they can carry. We have to, or our customer in Europe, which is slowly reopening, or other countries, may have to accept higher air freight charges. Also, the transit times are longer because there are more stopovers. So, in the next slides now, we come to the questions that you have already sent in. Yeah, you can also ask more questions in the chat room. How did logistics companies, wait a minute, I have to open the slide because, how did logistics companies adapt their operations with barrier gestures to prevent possible spread? Okay, there are, of course, the offices in the service industry, also in the logistics industry. You have to stay open also during a crisis. Yeah, if several customers have problems, maybe they cannot ship out, there are other customers that can still ship out. So what happened? Either you have enough space in the office so that you can leave at least 2 meters between the employees. Yeah, this is what we did. We were lucky with that office space. Not every logistics company has this luxury. What many companies did, especially in Germany, yeah, if they did not work from home altogether, they kept 50% of the staff in the office and the other 50% worked from home. Yeah, and then because the quarantine time is 14 days, they changed every 14 days. Other companies, they changed every day, yeah, to still reduce the probability of infection. Yeah, does that answer this question? In an area of digitalization and process automation, what is the rough percentage of local companies using digitalized supply chain solutions, ERP, other digital platforms? And is it part of the strategy adopted by companies to face COVID-19? I do not have the rough percentage of companies that changed to any ERP or digital methods during this COVID crisis. What happened is that many companies, and that includes shipping lines, yeah, they accepted all this information by internet, electronic BLs. We have electronic BLs now so that the original doesn't need to be picked up. They had also in their offices, when messengers came to pick up the BLs or the DOs, that there were barriers and mandatory masks and gel and all this. Digital platforms were used by companies that already had digital platforms. If you can increase the part you do by internet rather than personal interaction, this is what many people used. I don't have the number of percentage, but yes, this was a big push for digitalization. Some companies that had systems where you have to be in the LAN in the office in order to connect to the office computer system, they implemented VPN. VPN is a technology where you can be outside of your own office, and through this technology, it is as if you are in the office. So the staff could work from home and did not have to be in the office. How does the supply chain and logistics industry immediately adapt for a change which would take years to implement? Okay, this is a question to any industry. The logistics and supply chain industry is not very different. There was already a move towards digitalization, and there were plans already in place, and this have just been pushed forward. Yeah, as I said, either using VPN or using EBLs, e-airway builds, which we have in Germany right now, in Cambodia not yet, but this kind of thing is being pushed a lot more now. How will COVID change the mindset and thought process of the consumer? This is a question that goes into consumer behavior, that's marketing rather than supply chain. Right? But what we see in supply chain and logistics is now that e-commerce, online buying by website, has had a huge push. And this means for many suppliers that they have to change their supply chain. Yeah, you usually supplied to a wholesaler who supplied to a retail shop, and you did some online also. And now this all changed. Now most of your business suddenly is online, yeah, by e-commerce, which means that you have to have another system. You have it in place already, but you have to expand this online system. There is good software around, but you have to see where do you want to have your warehouses, and how is the warehouse management, distribution center management, that changes in these times. Will that be continuing after COVID is over? This is important for your strategic planning. Yeah, you have distribution centers, you have warehouses. Do you have to change anything there long term? Right? This is a question you ask 5 people, you get 10 opinions. Yeah, my opinion is that online, many people have tried it for the first time and they like it, so they may stay with it. But I do believe that retail sales will get a big push back, especially in Southeast Asia, where shopping is not just only done in order to buy goods, but also as an experience. Do you expect that more companies will move towards shorter supply chains, even keeping production in their own country as a result from COVID-19? That depends very much on the product itself. Is it possible? We have many products now that need international supply chains because you cannot get this component in that quality for that price somewhere else, and you have so many different components. Is it possible? Yeah. Do we go back from globalization to national sourcing? I don't think so. I think people will look into that, but I don't think for all products, or for the majority of products, it will make sense. We have to see what the future brings. So, what we see as a sudden surge of buying by people, will it turn out to be a volatile curve, or will it sustain over a period of time? That depends on the product. We saw in Europe a huge increase in demand for toilet paper. That was Germany. In France, the huge increase in demand when the COVID crisis started, and this stay-at-home policy in France, what increased was the sales of wine, good wine. What increased in Thailand was the demand for eggs, for some reason that I don't really understand. I think people were hoarding goods out of a panic reaction. I want to do something, so I want to make sure that I'm not vulnerable as a person, so then the demand in retail for certain products increased. I do not think that will continue that way. Now, I do believe that when the COVID crisis is over, that includes there is a vaccination, there is a cure, that the demand will go back to what it was before or increase the way it increased before, so that this was a disruption, but the marketing curves, they will continue afterwards. That's what I think. Do we have any new products that people will want to buy because they have learned something from COVID? Maybe initially, but after a year or two, when the crisis is over, people fall back into their habits. I do believe that online sales will continue to increase. Flows of goods, merchandises in and out of the country. Yeah, okay. I think this question means the problems we have with the flow of goods across borders. Now, the land border between Thailand and Cambodia was never closed. Yes? And then a sea freight, we have exports of sea freight. I already mentioned there were blank sailings. There were ships that were booked out. That was a delay in delivery, but that was all workable and worked out for everybody. And with the crisis coming to an end, maybe, I'm not saying that it's now, but when it comes to an end, this will go back to normal. Air freight is still a problem. We have shortages of air space, and we have very expensive air freight rates. I see shipments being changed from air freight to sea freight. I also see air freight shipments being trucked from Cambodia to Thailand, because Thailand still has more capacity than Cambodia. Yeah, but now, over the last 2 weeks, more and more airlines fly to Cambodia again, not for the passengers, that's still the problem, but to pick up cargo, because it's a big market for them now. So all telecom equipment is manufactured outside the country, and currently there is no more flight. With sea freight option is taking longer. How to sustain the business operation? Okay, this is very specific, probably to your company or to your industry. So I would need more information to help you there, how to solve that problem. In general, as I said, there is still air freight available. I don't know what kind of volumes or tonnages you need. You can contact me or Eurocham after this webinar, and we can go into this problem in detail. As per our current facing issue, the production cannot be shipped or sent out and get stuck at exporting country. Air freight is too high. Yeah, as I said, air freight is possible, but it's very expensive at the moment, forcing us to change to sea, but some products cannot be shipped by sea due to dry container. What do you mean due to dry container? You mean they don't fit into a container? Yeah, okay. There are limitations in transports and transport quantities, volume that we have right now. So what we have is big shipments. We separate into smaller shipments, and then instead of one flight, it will have a lot on every flight, which may be daily, which may be 3 times a week only. So we have a longer transportation time. You have to accommodate that in your planning. For sea freight, okay, if it cannot be shipped in a container because it's too big, then that's a different issue anyway, right? So either you use flat rack containers or you use conventional vessels. The conventional vessels, bulk carriers, are not affected by the COVID crisis, yeah, because they never had scheduled services anyway. Yeah. We are setting up a wholesale food distribution company with a partner in Vietnam. We worry about the cold chain. Would you recommend sea freight or road freight? that depends on the cost and where in Vietnam it goes to. You can transport goods by truck, by cool trucks to Vietnam. There's absolutely no problem. And you can transport goods by reefer container. That is also not a problem. I would compare the cost. As I said, it depends on the quantities and it depends on the final destination. Please post. Okay. Do you think that companies should have a budget for economic disasters such as COVID-19 in their annual forecasting? Yes. Yeah, you always have a cash flow reserve for unpredictable events. Yeah, what happened now? I see that with the airlines. Yeah, they had enough cash. 1 month would not have hurt them. Depending on the airline, 3 months became critical. And now the airline business will still be down after the pandemic is over because people still don't want to fly, either because they have to save money, they don't have the money right now, or because they have other priorities. So the airlines are facing a very long, extended problem. And this is why they're in the press now and asking for the governments to help. But yes, you always need a stack of cash in order to be prepared for any kind of crisis that cannot be predicted. Let me get back to the last question on the slide. Because of COVID-19, everywhere is adopting working from home, how to make sure supply chain are more effective. Good question. So what do you do in the supply chain, right? What we do in procurement, customs clearance, logistics, this kind of thing is we use a lot of computers, we use a lot of internet already. Yeah. So I was told we don't even need to be in the office. What do we need to be in the office for? And the reason is not a technical one. We have many meetings also now online with conferencing software like this webinar, but also, you know, we have everybody's picture there. Everybody has an open mic. The thing that helps you is when you need to look for new suppliers, you want to renegotiate, then it's always better to meet in person. Sometimes in order to fix problems in the supply chain, you have to see your supplier, or you have to go to the port. I go to the port or airport often for my customers to fix problems there with customs. You cannot do everything online or by telephone. But for the technical and routine supply chain, there is no change. With the internet right now, we do everything online. We do our sea freight bookings online. We do our customs clearance online. We order new components from the supplier online. So that is not a big issue that people work from home now. Well, the question is only when they work from home, do they really work 8 hours a day, right? So the management problem is a different issue. Oh, dry container is hot inside. Okay. That was for the telecom product, right? Okay, yes. So reefer container would probably be too expensive. As per our products cannot be shipped or sent out and get stuck at the I already mentioned that. Dry container. Do you think? As a context of COVID, every company, shipper, manufacturer, 3PL buyer, retailer is pushing for reducing cost. Somebody will get cut, somebody will cut. In the situation of chaos, how we expect different companies to collaborate to run smooth supply chain at overall level for the final end customer. And this is a good point, and this is also a point I keep making. When we deal with the supply chain, we deal not only with our direct supplier, but we deal with the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. And we deal not only with our direct customer, the importer in another country, but also his wholesalers, his retailers. These are also our concern. Right? So in a supply chain, we all have to work together. Of course, everybody has the same problem. Demand is low, so we need to reduce cost. Everybody trying to squeeze everybody is not helping. People will get hurt. Companies will get hurt. Yeah. What you have to do is you have to work together. I need my supplier to go down with the price, otherwise my costs are too high. Right? So we have to negotiate, we have to compromise. Even if I know I'm his most important customer, I cannot tell him you have to reduce to this price because I want him to survive. And in order to survive, he needs to more than cover his cost. He also needs to have profit. Right? And then I also have to talk to my customer who wants me to reduce my price and have to explain to him why that is not possible. In addition, in supply chains, and I have seen that many times because I visit customers, I also do consulting jobs, people are wasting money in the way they manage their supply chains. Yeah, so now is a good time to look at the efficiency of your supply chain, how you manage this. Yeah, one example is warehouse management, inventory management, which is two different things, right? Where you can save or waste a lot of money. This way you can reduce your cost without even having to squeeze your supplier. So what is an issue if the shipment transit in a third country is it would be returned to origin or stuck at there if the country border was closed. Okay. Okay. I'm thinking of an example. Example I had last month actually. A shipment from Europe to Afghanistan, and the plan was to truck it to Uzbekistan and through Uzbekistan into Afghanistan. And then the Uzbekistan-Afghanistan border was closed. Shipment in Uzbekistan. What do we do? Yeah. So at this moment, we're talking today, I would say calculate what 14 days storage charges would cost. It depends on the situation of that country. Is that country at the tail end of the COVID crisis, like we are in Southeast Asia right now? Then maybe the border will be open soon. Or is it just starting right now? South America, Africa, just starting right now. We can expect the borders to be closed for a long time. What is the cost of bringing the goods back? What I have seen with one customer is when they could not reach that customer because that country was closed, basically the customer was closed also. Even if they get the goods to him somehow, he couldn't do anything with it. Right? So what they did is they found another buyer in the region. That is not always possible, right? But that is a third option I would look into. How should we make supply chain effective and efficient? I can tell you all about this in the next course, Supply Chain Management, that I will give at Eurochem in Phnom Penh. We are waiting for the borders to be opened, but that course is 1 week and it's really worth it. Oh, okay. So we will have 3 minutes left. There were 2 more questions we got in. What is the highest risk area to focus within supply chain network? What is new normal to be seen in supply chain? The new normal that I expect after the COVID crisis is over will be the old normal. Yeah, so I expect that in the supply chain, everything will go back to normal. what we were used to before COVID. And then the highest risk area, what we have right now is, do we get the supplies? Was a big problem in Cambodia because components for the garments came from China, and then the Chinese supplier could not supply. Now the situation is better, right? But that is a problem that we have to keep in mind. Dual sourcing, keep that also for the future. Any problem can come back again. Any crisis can come back again. And another problem we have now is transportation, with a lot less airspace and space on airplanes, and much, much more expensive. So find a solution for your company. Maybe you have to keep more safety stock in the future. You cannot keep safety stock for 3 months. That's too much, right? But maybe that could reduce your problem. And then supply chain in agriculture, that depends on whether this is local or international. If you have international transports, agricultural products are usually shipped by sea and not by air. Yes, we have less space on the ships right now. We still do have space, so if we have a delay of 3 weeks, that's exceptional, really. One good thing about agricultural products, the demand should not be reduced because people will still have to eat. So if there is no more question at this moment, I would like to thank you very much, and I give the microphone back to Tom. Tom?
Hi, Thomas. Yes, thank you very much for that tour de force on logistics issues in Cambodia at the moment and the specific issues to do with coronavirus. Yeah, I have to thank you very much, Thomas, for taking the time to speak to us today. For all participants as well, thank you for joining today's webinar. Thank you for your active participation. Thank you for your questions before the webinar and during the chat box. We hope you learned a lot. If there was any specific question that you didn't get to ask right now, we will post this on the YouTube video on YouTube. So please feel free to comment a question under the YouTube video, and Eurocham and Thomas Fernandez will try and answer it there as well. So once again, Thomas, thank you very much. Participants, thank you very much. I have to say thank you to the Eurocham production team as well, Guillaume Montarin and Champavate Sov for putting the effort into making this happen. So on that note, I hope everybody has a good rest of your Wednesday, and we hope to see you at the next Eurocham webinar. Goodbye.